1921, Idaho. The parallel furrows of a freshly plowed potato field. For 14-year-old Philo T. Farnsworth, this wasn't just dirt. It was a code for transmitting a live image across distances. At the very same time, in the gleaming laboratories of the RCA Corporation, hundreds of top engineers had been treading water for decades. They had invested over $50 million, a sum equivalent to $1 billion today, into their dead-end mechanical technology. So how did a boy from the sticks, without resources or formal education, manage to make a conceptual leap that proved beyond the reach of the world's most powerful technological corporation? This central question gives rise to two even deeper and more troubling paradoxes that defined his entire life. What explains the fact that by the time of the inventor's death, every American television contained about 100 components he had patented, yet his name was virtually erased from history? And how could RCA Corporation, with its army of top lawyers, lose a court case to a lone genius when a simple school drawing, made 12 years before the trial, was presented as key evidence against them? By the end of this film, you will gain 6 keys to understanding this incredible battle, from the idea in the field and the creation of the dissector to corporate espionage, the patent war, the crucial evidence, and a tragic Pyrrhic victory. This is not just a story, but a manual for waging a David versus Goliath war. In just 2 minutes, you will see how a simple analogy with a potato field enabled a conceptual breakthrough that thousands of engineers had failed to achieve. To understand Farnsworth's genius, one must first understand the impasse in which all global science found itself. For decades, the brightest minds had tried to build television using rotating mechanical discs. This seemed like the only path, but it was a dead end. Cumbersome, noisy, unreliable machines produced only a blurry, flickering image. It was like trying to read a book while furiously shaking your head from side to side. Farnsworth, however, saw what others missed. He understood that it was not matter that needed to move, but light. His idea was crushingly simple. An electronic beam controlled by a magnetic field would scan an image line by line, just as a plow cultivates a field. No moving parts, only the speed of electrons. This was not a step forward, it was a leap into another dimension. But the brilliant idea born on a farm now required money, and Farnsworth's next battle would unfold not in the realm of physics, but in the offices of investors. How could a 19-year-old without a diploma convince serious Californian businessmen to invest in something that sounded like science fiction? He explained the most complex principles of quantum physics on the back of napkins. His conviction and burning eyes persuaded them to bet $6,000 on his dream, which today is equivalent to almost $100,000. It seemed the main problem was solved. But reality proved far harsher. Farnsworth didn't just need to assemble one device, he had to create an entire industry from scratch in his garage. He personally blew specialized vacuum tubes. He experimented with cathodes and phosphors. He was, in effect, inventing the tools to invent television. And in this race against time, he was not alone. RCA Corporation was already breathing down his neck, though they didn't yet know his name. Now, with money and tools, he had to assemble the heart of his system, a device that would change the world. The heart of the system was to be the world's first all-electronic transmitting tube, the image dissector. On paper, everything was logical. The device was supposed to convert light from an object into a stream of electrons. But theory collided with harsh practice. Months turned into a series of desperate failures. Glass tubes exploded in their hands. The precious vacuum constantly leaked, rendering the devices useless. His team was on the verge of despair, and only his wife, Pem, who worked as an assistant, kept his faith alive. And then, on September 7, 1927, it happened. In a dimly lit San Francisco laboratory, smelling of ozone from the high-voltage equipment, 5 people held their breath. On the tiny receiver screen appeared a thin, glowing horizontal line. It was the first all-electronic television signal in human history. But investors needed not a line, but proof of commercial potential, and the next image he transmitted ironically predicted the future war. What was the first meaningful image Farnsworth transmitted to prove to investors that his invention would bring profit? He transmitted a $sign. This choice seemed witty and a direct message: your investments will pay off. But behind this pragmatic gesture lay a deep and tragic paradox. Farnsworth was an idealist. He believed that television would become the greatest educational tool, eradicating ignorance and uniting nations. This dollar sign became an ominous prophecy. It was like a seed that already contained the genetic code of the entire future industry, the pursuit of profit, not enlightenment. While Farnsworth dreamed of education for the masses, a man who saw only power and money was already knocking at his door, and he was ready to take this invention at any cost. The next step in this story will reveal this man's name and the mechanism of corporate vampirism. This man was David Sarnoff, head of the RCA Corporation, the general of the radio industry, who already saw television as his next monopoly. Why did he, the manager of a giant empire, so fear an unknown inventor from Utah? His plan seemed impeccable. Thousands of RCA engineers and an unlimited budget had been unable to solve the problem of electronic TV for years. And then Sarnoff learned that some kid had solved it. This was not just a technical failure, it was a blow to his ego. His first reaction, an attempt to buy him out. He offered Farnsworth $100,000, but on the condition that his name would not appear anywhere. Farnsworth refused. $100,000 in 1929 was equivalent to $1.7 million today, a price for which one could buy a small skyscraper, but not the name of a genius. It was then that Sarnoff decided to destroy him. For this, he sent his best spy. This spy was another brilliant engineer, and his visit to Farnsworth's laboratory went down in history as one of the most brazen acts of corporate espionage. His name was Vladimir Zworykin, a leading RCA engineer and an outstanding inventor himself. How was he able to deceive the genius and gain access to his most closely guarded secrets? The weapon was Farnsworth's own openness and naivety. Zworykin arrived under the guise of a fellow scientist, admiring the work, playing the role of a humble student. He created the illusion of a scientific brotherhood, untouched by corporate intrigues. Farnsworth, as a true scientist, believed him. In a burst of idealism, he showed his guest absolutely everything. Zworykin spent 3 full days in the laboratory, sketching and memorizing every detail of the working dissector. He got answers to all the questions he had been unable to solve in his own laboratory for years. He held the working dissector in his hands, still warm after the demonstration, and asked questions that Farnsworth proudly answered. Upon leaving the laboratory, Zworykin allegedly told his team, "Guys, I've seen it all. Now we just have to build it." The theft was complete. But simply copying the technology was not enough. They needed to steal the very right to the invention. And RCA launched a machine that was not just meant to copy the technology, but to rewrite the very history of its creation. Why did RCA, having already stolen the technology, not simply begin to use it, but instead unleash total war? Their goal was not just profit, but complete monopoly and control over history. They launched a 2-pronged attack. The first part, a powerful PR campaign. RCA began to present Zworykin as the sole father of television, culminating in the 1939 World's Fair. They created a beautiful but false history for the public. Simultaneously, they employed a tactic of legal strangulation. They sued Farnsworth, accusing him of infringing their patents, although the opposite was true. Sarnoff's strategy was simple: overwhelm the lone individual with lawsuits until he ran out of money and strength. RCA's tactic worked like a wildfire. On one side, they created a giant plume of smoke with their PR campaign to distract everyone. On the other, under the cover of this smoke, a small but deadly fire of lawsuits crept towards Farnsworth's home. But this evidence first needed to be found. Next will begin the most desperate hunt for evidence in the history of technology. What could be stronger than the army of lawyers of a multi-billion-dollar corporation and its PR machine? This question faced Farnsworth and his small team. It seemed the battle was lost. The answer seemed simple: truth, backed by evidence. Farnsworth had detailed laboratory journals, blueprints, and working prototypes. This created the illusion of a strong legal position. However, RCA's lawyers questioned every date and every signature. They claimed that all records could have been forged or backdated. The burden of proof fell entirely on Farnsworth. More than 250 separate legal motions were filed by RCA against Farnsworth with the sole purpose of disputing the authenticity of his records. It was at this moment of despair that the last hope was born. Evidence was needed that had been created long before this war began. Testimony from the past that no one could dispute. But where to find it? The next section will immerse us in the details of this legal war and show how a system works where proving the truth is harder than fabricating it. Farnsworth had patent number 1,773,980, filed earlier than Zworykin's. So why did the U.S. Patent Office even initiate this dispute? In those years, the principle was not of the first applicant, but of the first inventor. This seemed like a fair system, protecting true creators. But it was precisely this system that created a loophole for corporations. RCA put forward an absurd, yet legally significant claim. Zworykin allegedly conceived everything back in 1919 in Russia, but could not prove it due to the Civil War. This statement instantly shifted the entire burden of proof to Farnsworth. Now, the 28-year-old inventor had to prove to the world that he invented television when he was 14. This system worked like a 100-meter dash. Farnsworth crossed the finish line first, but the judge, in the person of RCA, declared that it was actually a marathon, and the start had been given 10 years ago. Now Farnsworth had to prove that he started running earlier than everyone else, even though no one had seen it. And this impossible task was exacerbated by the colossal inequality of resources. How could Farnsworth, constantly working to improve the technology, afford to sue America's wealthiest corporation? His initial investors continued to support him. His wife, Pem, sold their personal belongings to pay the lawyer's bills. But the scale of inequality was enormous. RCA's annual legal budget exceeded $10 million. They hired an entire army of the country's best lawyers. Farnsworth, on the other hand, was forced to sell shares of his own company at a discounted price to pay for the services of just one attorney. David Sarnoff knew that, even if he lost in court, he could win the war simply by bankrupting his opponent. This was a classic asymmetric war of attrition. The judge demanded irrefutable evidence, and time, and most importantly, money, were running out. In this race against time, Farnsworth made a desperate mental effort, trying to remember anyone who could confirm his story. RCA's lawyers methodically questioned every date and every signature in his laboratory journals. They created the illusion that Farnsworth was not a genius, but a cunning fraudster who had backdated his records. At a moment of despair, when it seemed all was lost, a turning point occurred. Farnsworth remembered a key moment. As a 14-year-old, he had drawn a complete diagram of his invention on a school blackboard and excitedly explained it to his chemistry teacher, Justin Tolman. But this was in a forgotten town in Idaho, more than 10 years ago. Where to find this teacher now? And even if he was alive, would he even remember that conversation with one of his hundreds of students? A desperate search began. This was the last chance. And just as hope had almost faded, the teacher was found. But what he would bring into the courtroom would exceed all wildest expectations. What one item or memory from your distant past could prove your case in a billion-dollar lawsuit? This simple exercise shows how fragile our personal history is. For Farnsworth, more than money or a patent was at stake. It was his name, his legacy, and his truth. Losing would mean being erased from history. And so, when hope had almost faded, his brother found that very teacher, Justin Tolman. But did he remember? And, more importantly, did he have any evidence beyond words? The next episode will take us into the courtroom, where a humble schoolteacher will take the stand to battle Goliath's legal army. The entire fate of the invention now depended on one man's memory. And Justin Tolman didn't just remember, he vividly recounted how he was astonished by the idea of 14-year-old Philo, who, with glowing eyes, explained to him the concept of electronic scanning. But reality surpassed all expectations. Tolman explained that after that conversation, he sketched the diagram from the blackboard into his personal notebook so he wouldn't forget it. And he had kept it. All these years, it had been lying in his home. It was a simple black-bound notebook. Its pages had yellowed with time, and on one of them, in pencil, was that very drawing, a schematic of electronic television from 1922. This was the physical evidence. But would the court accept the testimony of a simple teacher and his old notebook against the might of the RCA Corporation? Tension filled the courtroom. On one side, an army of confident RCA lawyers. On the other, Justin Tolman, calmly and methodically recounting that day in 1922. RCA's lawyer decided to employ a tactic of humiliation. He asked a sarcastic question. "And you want the court to believe that a 14-year-old farm boy explained the principle of television to you?" Tolman's answer went down in history. He calmly looked at the lawyer and said, "Philo's idea was so clear and logical that even I, a simple chemistry teacher, could understand it." And he opened the notebook, presenting that very drawing to the court. This answer was like a lever, a simple but perfectly applied force that overturned the entire cumbersome structure of RCA's accusation. The answer disarmed the prosecution. But what exactly was on that drawing that made it a legal knockout? The power of the drawing lay in its simplicity and completeness. It schematically depicted all the key elements of a fully electronic system, a cathode ray as the scanning element, a luminescent screen, and even the idea of synchronizing signals. It was a complete concept, but the decisive blow was dealt by the dates. The drawing was made and attested by the teacher in 1922. Zworykin's first patent application describing something similar was filed only in 1923. Farnsworth's drawing was made 521 days before Vladimir Zworykin filed his first application. The patent court's verdict from 1934 was unequivocal. Priority of invention of electronic television is awarded to Philo T. Farnsworth. David had defeated Goliath. It seemed this was the end of the story, but his main enemy had not yet had his final say. How did David Sarnoff, a man who never lost, react to this defeat? He was furious. For the first time in its history, RCA was forced to sign a licensing agreement and pay royalties for the use of someone else's patent. This was a moment of triumph. But Sarnoff had lost the battle, not the war. He ordered his lawyers to file endless appeals, delaying payments and continuing to drain Farnsworth's financial resources. And then, a third, far more terrible force intervened in their war, World War II. The production of consumer electronics was frozen. Factories shifted to wartime needs. Over 10 years of litigation and war-related delays, Farnsworth received only $1 million in royalties from RCA. This was less than 1% of what the corporation earned from his invention during the same period. The next section will reveal the most tragic paradox of this story: how one can win a war for truth and simultaneously lose everything. How did a global military conflict in which America emerged victorious lead to financial ruin for its own inventor? After the court victory, the path to success seemed open. The U.S. government froze commercial television production for the duration of World War II. All national resources were diverted to wartime needs. This seemed like an annoying but temporary obstacle. But there was one critical legal nuance that everyone missed. The 17-year term of his key patents was not frozen. It continued to inexorably expire. His 17-year patent worked like a candle lit in a draft. The war halted all production around, but the patent's wick continued to burn relentlessly, consuming precious time. By the time the television boom began after the war, Farnsworth's most important patents had already expired. For his victory, he received only $1 million in royalties from RCA. This was an amount that the corporation earned from his technology in just a few days in the 1950s. But the loss of money was merely a prelude. His own invention became the instrument that erased his name from history. Why, even after an official court victory, did Farnsworth's name not stand alongside Edison or Bell? Legally, his priority was proven, which makes the situation even more absurd. The power that rewrote history was in the hands of RCA. The corporation used its radio stations, newspapers, and then television itself to promote the myth of its founding fathers, primarily Vladimir Zworykin. This seems like a standard PR strategy, but the numbers show the true scale of the injustice. By 1971, the year of Farnsworth's death, the average American television contained about 100 components based on his patents. Yet 99% of Americans had never heard his name. This is as if 99% of drivers had never heard the name Henry Ford. Farnsworth created the world's most powerful tool for shaping public opinion, and this tool was used to historically destroy him. He became a victim of his own monster, and this crushing blow could not but affect the man himself, launching him into a deep personal tragedy. What became of the man who gave the world television, after the world virtually took this invention from him? Farnsworth did not give up. He continued to work, shifting his genius to other projects, including research in nuclear fusion. However, behind the facade of genius lay a deep personal drama. The years of struggle led to 3 devastating consequences: severe depression, problems with alcohol, and complete exhaustion. He forbade his own children from watching television, calling it a curse. His son, Kent Farnsworth, recalled how his father once saw him by the screen and said with pain in his voice, "There's nothing to watch there. We won't find anything good there." The man who gave the world eyes did not want to see what his brainchild had become. He died in 1971 in relative obscurity and debt. His death in obscurity forces us to reconsider his entire legacy. Perhaps his true victory lay beyond money and fame. How can one, having lost everything, money, fame, and health, ultimately be considered a winner? From a financial and public perspective, Farnsworth's life is a story of tragic failure. He gained neither wealth nor widespread recognition during his lifetime. But the picture changes when we shift the focus from money to truth. His main goal was legal recognition of authorship, and in this battle he achieved an unequivocal victory. His name is forever inscribed in patent number 1773980. The U.S. Patent Office officially affirmed his priority in case number 64027, Farnsworth versus Zworykin. This was a victory of principle over capital. His true victory is not a patent but a precedent. His story became an eternal lesson and a warning about the struggle of pure creativity against ruthless capital. This drama is more relevant today than ever, and to extract its main lesson, it is necessary to bring together all elements of his struggle in a final conclusion. Now that we see the whole map of this struggle, we can piece together the 6 key acts of this drama. This is not just a story, but a universal journey of an innovator. The first act, the idea in the potato field. This is the spark of pure genius, a conceptual leap that no one else sees. The second, the image dissector. This is the stubbornness of embodiment, turning an impossible idea into a working artifact. The third, corporate espionage. This is the brutal clash of idealism with reality, where openness becomes vulnerability. The fourth, the patent war. This is the battle for truth in a system where righteousness must be proven. The fifth, testimony from the past. This is the triumph of a simple, irrefutable fact over an army of lawyers. And finally, the sixth act, a Pyrrhic victory. This is the price a creator pays in a world governed by capital. This sequence is an archetypal drama that repeats again and again. And now that we see the entire structure, it's time to provide the final answers to the questions posed at the very beginning. At the beginning of this film, we asked 2 paradoxical questions. Here are the exhaustive answers. Why was Farnsworth's name, despite his 100 patents in every television, erased from history? For 2 reasons. First, RCA Corporation controlled the information landscape. Through radio, newspapers, and television itself, they created and solidified the myth of Zworykin as the founding father. The second reason, his Pyrrhic victory. Expired patents deprived him of the financial leverage to fight for his name. History is written by the victors, and in the financial war, the corporation won. How then did a simple school drawing manage to defeat this giant? Its legal power lay in 3 components. It was independent evidence, confirmed by a teacher. It was dated 1922, which was earlier than any of Zworykin's applications, and it was physically documented. It was a simple, unassailable fact that RCA's army of lawyers could neither dispute nor discredit. But for this truth to be heard by the world, it took decades of one person's efforts. That person was his wife, Elma Pem Farnsworth. A loyal companion during his life, she became the tireless guardian of his legacy after his death. For decades, she fought to restore the name that had been taken from him, and her efforts bore fruit. Today, a statue of Philo Farnsworth stands in the National Statuary Hall of the U.S. Capitol. His name is returning to textbooks, books are being written about him, and films are being made. Justice, with great delay, but has begun to be restored. His contribution to modern technology is like the oxygen we breathe. It's everywhere, it's vital, but we don't notice it until someone tells us about its existence. And his story is an eternal lesson for every inventor and startup today entering a patent war with technological giants. This story presents each of us with a fundamental choice. At the center of this drama stand two figures, Philo Farnsworth and David Sarnoff. These are not simply good and evil. They are two archetypes, two approaches to progress. Farnsworth is pure genius, an idealist driven by the thirst for discovery. Sarnoff is the system, a pragmatist driven by building an industry and capturing the market. Genius provides the spark, but the system builds civilization from it. So whose approach, in your opinion, ultimately benefited the world more? We ask you to write just one word in the comments that defines your position: genius or system. Genius or system? Who truly shapes our world? This question remains open. Thank you for helping us restore the memory of a great and forgotten inventor.